All right, so next up is Dave, and he's going to be telling us about assemblages in glacial lakes.
Thank you. I'm Dave Marshall. I actually live in the Driftless area. I'm Vice President of the Friends of the Lower Wisconsin Riverway. However, we have no glacial lakes in the Driftless area, but I'm here to talk about glacial lakes. I do survey some in this area. I worked 30 years for Wisconsin DNR in the Lakes program. And so I've been specializing in surveying non-game fishes since I retired from DNR in 2006. A lot of you have maybe walked along shorelines of some of the glacial lakes in this area and seen large schools of tiny, shiny fish. This is a shot I took in the 1980s of mixed school of mimic shiners and fathead minnows. And on the lower right is a macro shot of a fathead minnow or blunt-nosed minnow.
No, it's not going to do it. So click. There we go. Wait for next.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
I was fortunate to grow up on two lakes in Michigan in the 1950s and 1960s. One lake is located 50 miles south of the Mackinac Bridge, where I had grandparents that lived in a small cabin on a mostly undeveloped wilderness lake, and I had an aunt and uncle that owned a small resort not far away. In southwest Michigan, my parents had a small cottage on a clear calcareous lake. And in the 1950s, my favorite TV show was Sea Hunt. And so I would, as a kid, I would put on a mask, fins, and snorkel and cruise the shallows. And I was always impressed by the diversity of fish and seeing the aquatic life in these lakes. So about a year ago, I was kind of interested to find out what these fish were that I experienced as a kid. So I reached out to the lakes programs in Michigan, and there really wasn't any information available. Now, had I asked this question about, two random lakes in Wisconsin, it probably would have been similar. There's typically not a lot of interest in non-game fish, even though they're important parts of lake ecosystems. So if you look at a typical glacial lake, the shoreline, the nearshore area is usually less than 10% of the total area of the lake. But this is where you'll find over 90% of the biodiversity. And this is the habitat during the growing season that the nearshore fish assemblage can be found. This is also part of the lake where most of the changes will occur due to shoreline development. Most lake programs do not focus on surveying fish. There was one large survey where we do have a database for non-game fish. That was conducted in the 1970s, known as the Fish Distribution Study. I will give credit to SewerPack, because it's one of the few bodies that actually keeps track of some of these rare fishes that have declined in many lakes. But the fish distribution study was, the funding ended in about 1980. A lot of these lakes in this area were sampled, not all by any means. But so we do have a kind of historic database of some of the non-game fishes that you find in the nearshore areas of lakes. In 2004, when I was still at DNR, we had an interest to see if there were any changes. We sampled 15 lakes, and these lakes did not experience a change in environmental conditions. Water quality remained good, but there was a change in the amount of nearshore development. And what we found was not encouraging. We found declines in most of the lakes in total species richness and the numbers of rare and and intolerant species. We also counted piers in the lakes that we sampled as well. And in lakes where there was high pier densities, we found the lowest numbers of rare and intolerant species. And of course, correlation does not necessarily mean causation. However, that same year in 2004, we conducted a study looking at potential changes in habitat and biota under piers due to shading effects. And we did find that under piers, there were significantly lower numbers of fish, aquatic insects, crustaceans, and aquatic plants. And so what that regression had showed is more likely what Radomski had described as piers have an impact as our research had demonstrated, but they're also indicators of a lot of other things that are going along and along with shorelines where there is development. So while there is currently not a program to systematically look at non-game fish in lakes in Wisconsin, some of us geezer or retirees from DNR have partnered with some of the lakes that lake partners that are interested in continuing these types of surveys. So we typically use small mesh seines, as the photo on the right demonstrates on Geneva Lake, which was done during the fish distribution study and some other historic surveys. However, we've added nearshore electroshocking, which is typically done in smaller streams because it's more effective at identifying fish that live in structures such as snags and boulders and so forth that are hard to sample with seines. We sampled the entire Madison chain of lakes in from 2017 to 2020. Lake Mendota had a historic database for non-game fish and had quite a significant assemblage that mostly disappeared. There is very little information on the other lakes, but we decided to do an update on Lake Mendota and do the other lakes as well. And what we found that most of the shoreline of Lake Mendota and the other lakes were riprapped. And we found something that we didn't expect. If you look at the dominant fish are now sunfish in these lakes and bullheads. And we found them in pretty much equal numbers where there is riprap or non-riprap areas. However, we did not find a lot of the small non-game fishes, which appeared to be disappearing from these lakes. The lowest numbers of non-game fishes were actually occurred in Lake Mendota, which is the least eutrophic of the lakes. And we found the most non-game fish in Lake Eganza, which is the most eutrophic and had the least amount of riprap. So looking at the habitat differences between riprap shores and shores where we have shallow shoals is the shallow areas are completely removed, and this will likely increase predation, although we don't know that for sure. So another lake we looked at in the last decade is Rock Lake in Jefferson County. And, we find surprises when we do a lot of these surveys. Rock Lake still has a fairly intact nearshore fish assemblage, but we found an additional fish, a species known as slender madtom. Up until this survey, slender madtoms had never been found in lakes. They'd only been found in fast-moving, clear streams. They're in the Bark River, for instance, as one of the main locations. It's a very rare fish, yet we found them in Rock Lake. And without doing surveys like this, we never would have made this discovery. We do sample Geneva Lake every year in your area. And we found some surprises there as well. There has been a decline in this, in part of the nearshore fish assemblage. And what is surprising for Geneva Lake is we find we sample shorelines where the habitat looks really good, but we're not finding the fish. So why is that? But one thing that we did notice along these shorelines, they're just being hammered with boat wakes. And research has demonstrated that the turbulence from boat wakes is a lot stronger than natural waves. And so that may have may be a contributing factor. So the fish, this is kind of an example of the types of fish you'll see in the nearshore fish assemblage, which is typically ignored in management or fisheries management. So on your upper left, you have your darters, which are members of the perch family. The lower left is in the sucker family is the lake chub sucker, which is a state special concern species. The top middle are the top middle family. There's 3 species in Wisconsin. The middle one is the state endangered starryhead top minnow. The top one is the western banded killifish. Then you have your living fossils, long-nosed gar and bowfin. Unfortunately, these are still classified as rough fish, which is an archaic classification, which does not help them survival in many cases. And the upper right are your minnow family, the largest family of fish in Wisconsin. And then a small member of the catfish family, in addition to the slender madtom, is the tadpole madtom. So assuming you have a lake that's never been sampled, you don't know what the nearshore assemblage is. Looking at the entire southeast Wisconsin glaciated areas, we find a regular pattern of about 30 species which we identified. And they represent a number of families and habitat preferences. And some are rare, and some most are actually vegetation dwelling. Some are environmentally intolerant, and some are small benthic species, which were historically hard to sample with small mesh seines. So it's likely that if a lake organization, if they have an interest in learning about what historically the nearshore fish assemblage was, or the status of it may be with a new survey, this can be kind of a template of what you can shoot for. And we're pretty confident that, for instance, in Lake Mendota, we know what the historic fishery was there for the nearshore fishery was in that lake, but there's no information for the lower lakes in that chain. But given migration patterns and that most of these fish live in both lakes and streams, that even increases the likelihood that migrations had occurred. Another lake we sampled, and something surprising, in Nagawicca Lake in the Bark River. A permit was approved to put in a shopping pier within a critical habitat area. This was a large pier to let people go from the lake to go shopping downtown. And we found the western banded killifish, which had never been found in that lake before, never been reported, but it should be no surprise because they are in that river system downstream in lower Nongame Lake. Camp Lake in your area is one lake where the nearshore fish assemblage changed very little over time. That is the most eutrophic lake of the lakes we sampled in 2004. and also had the lowest density of piers. So assuming you want to restore some of the lost assemblage in a lake where surveys have demonstrated it has disappeared, where are you going to find these fish? Most hatcheries do not produce these non-game fishes. The only two species that are raised commercially are the fathead minnows and golden shiners, but these will not do much to restore the intermediate food chain that is necessary in lakes. So this is kind of a story of non-game fish we looked at across southern Wisconsin. McGonigal River had the largest population until recently. They're found in the Fox River as well. We surveyed the lower Wisconsin River over the last 2 decades. When we started this survey, there was only 3 sites that it was found. The late George Becker suggested that it was so rare that a top minnow refuge was needed, but we found hundreds. And so we thought that his dream of a refuge had occurred. However, the habitat became degraded and is now threatened again. And so we've actually been able, because of nitrate pollution, this is a before and after shot of a backwater area that became completely choked with free-floating plants due to nitrate pollution. So we actually started our own conservation aquaculture project, and we've established populations above the Purdy-Sac Dam and expanded their range. So this is something that lake organizations could do is do a conservation aquaculture project. And we in our pond where my wife and I live in the driftless area, we started with 127 starry top minnows, and we've stocked over 8,000 above the Purdy-Sac Dam. And now Lake Ripley has started their own conservation aqua project to and hopefully restore some of the lost fish in Lake Ripley where they've disappeared. So thank you much.